So today we have Swami Sarvasthanandaji with us in this webinar series. And since he is from London, it is the origin of the Jnana Yoga lectures of Swami Vivekananda. And he was just now reminding me that this is the 125th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's Raj Yoga lectures, 1896.
Jnana Yoga.
Jnana Yoga. So we requested him to speak on Vivekananda's exposition of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, and he has kindly agreed. We will speak for 1 hour, followed by 15-20 minutes of question answer. Swami Sarvasthanandaji.
Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. It's a great privilege to participate in this seminar, which has been organized by Viveka Vyasa, a very apt name. Vivekananda Vedanta Yoga Adhyayana Samshodhana Alaya, a wonderful name, under the School of Indian Heritage of Vivekananda Center for Vedanta Yoga Studies and Research. The topic that I am supposed to discuss today is Swami Vivekananda's exposition of Jnana Yoga. As revered Swami Atma Priyananji mentioned, this happens to be the 125th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's talks on Jnana Yoga, which were delivered in London in 1896. Incidentally, a few miles away from this place, there is a place known as Maidenhead, where Swami Vivekananda first came when he visited England as a guest of E.T. Sturdy, and then for a few days he stayed in the house which was known as Mead House, in the house of Miss Henrietta Muller in Pinckney's Green. That's hardly 5 miles away from our Vedanta Center here. So in Henrietta Muller's house, where Swami Sharadananda and also Swami Vivekananda's pre-monastic brother Mahendranath Datta was also there, and he has recorded in his reminiscences in Pinckney's Green in Miss Henrietta Muller's house, where Swamiji is said that the thought currents of civilization have to be turned upside down. And that is exactly what he did through his Jnana Yoga lectures, which he delivered here. He delivered his lectures on Jnana Yoga both in America and also in London. Out of the 15 odd lectures that comprise of the book Jnana Yoga, the first series of 10 lectures were actually delivered later, and they have been published in the book Jnana Yoga. And they begin from the first talk on Jnana Yoga, that is the necessity of religion. And it ends with the talk, the freedom of the soul. So all these 10 lectures, they are also known as the London lectures. In fact, we got hold of a copy here in one of the oldest libraries, London Library, which has been xeroxed. In that book, the London lectures of Swami Vivekananda, they comprise of these 10 lectures only. It was one of the first books to be published. Later on, 5 more lectures were added, 5 or 6, which he delivered in New York. And though those lectures were delivered earlier than the London lectures, maybe in early 1896, in the book Jnana Yoga, they form the second part, the second part of the book. So today we will try to discuss each one of these lectures very briefly and see what are the common things which he spoke of and what was the message he gave. But one point we have to remember, that these lectures, or for that matter whatever else he preached, are words uttered out of deepest spiritual experience. He not only spoke of reality, but he experienced it, he saw it. He spoke what he had seen, what he had experienced. That's why we can't say that Swami Vivekananda spoke about some philosophy. Philosophy, the word philosophy, in fact, in Vedanta is known as darshana, that which is experienced, not that which is thought of or philosophized. That is not the tradition. And they are not mere intellectual assertions. So that's why you remember, if Josephine MacLeod, who when she first heard Swami Vivekananda speaking, she says in her own words that whatever he uttered was nothing but truth. The second thing he spoke was nothing but truth. The third thing, and all the things which he uttered were truth and truth alone. So that was the transformative power of Swami Vivekananda when he spoke gave these talks in London, Piccadilly, and there was one more place in Victoria Street. That place, of course, is not there, whereas the Piccadilly Hall, the Princess Hall, where more than 1,500 people could be accommodated. It's a very big hall. It's there in a different form now, but the building is still there. So that was in Piccadilly. The Piccadilly, the first few lectures are from Gyan Yoga were delivered in Piccadilly, whereas the others, they were class talks, regular class talks, which were held in a house in Victoria Street. But of course, that hall and that building also is not existing now. But most of the other places where Swami Vivekananda stayed, more than 11 or 12 places, they have been wonderfully preserved, maybe in some different form, but the original building is there. So in London, and before that in New York and in America, people could experience the wonderful wisdom of Jnana Yoga, not only understand or try to understand, but experience those truths. Swami Ashokananda also, in his reminiscences, or maybe in his somewhere he has mentioned that when he first read the lectures of Jnana Yoga, they absolutely transformed his life. We know how he got direct inspiration from Swami Vivekananda. So he said the whole idea, the wonderful originality of the lectures and the power behind those words, they were life transforming. And Ashokananda spoke of practically all his lectures, if you see, which he delivered in America, they were based on the Jnana Yoga, especially the practical Vedanta, which of course forms the last part of Jnana Yoga, but they have been published separately in volume 2 of complete works. So Jnana Yoga, according to Swamiji, I'll begin with a quote of Swamiji. Jnana Yoga, according to Swamiji, tells man that he is essentially divine. It shows to mankind the real unity of being, and that each one of us is the Lord God himself manifested on earth. All of us, from the lowest worm that crawls under our feet to the highest beings to whom we look up with wonder and awe, are all manifestations of the same Lord. So this is how Swami Vivekananda, especially in the talk God in Everything, seeing God in everything, he gives some wonderful ideas, something unique. You won't normally get these ideas in the traditional interpretation of Jnana Yoga or Vedanta, Advait Vedanta, by scholars. So it was based on, that is one point we should remember, it is based on the deepest spiritual experience. He was constantly, in every moment of his life, in every word that he spoke, in every action, he could see that divine, experience that divine, and also could transmit that divinity. That was the wonderful work he did in the West, and also after he came back to the East. So Gargi, Mary Louise Burke, or Sister Gargi as she was known later, says, while commenting upon his thoughts, Swami Vivekananda's thoughts, and especially about his lectures on Jnana Yoga, she did pioneering work trying to systematically arrange chronologically all the Jnana Yoga lectures. So in one of the New Discoveries volumes. I think it is volume 3 or 2. I'm not sure. She says a Gyan Yogi, I mean, as Swami Vivekananda expounded it, of Gyan Yogi of Swamiji, a person who tries to understand the Gyan Yoga of Swamiji, takes the teaching of Advaita Vedanta very seriously. And as Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, we have that tradition. He says he first hears it, then reflects upon it, becomes convinced of it, and then constantly asserts it in his life, as Swamiji said. And then she quotes a wonderful quote of Swamiji. It's an oft quoted quote of Swamiji. Swamiji once said, "Think always, I am Brahman. Every other thought must be cast aside as weakening. Cast aside every thought that says you are men or women. Let the body go, and mind go, and gods go, and ghosts go. Let everything go but that one existence. Get rid of all other thoughts. Everything else must be thrown aside, and this is to be repeated continually, poured through the ears until it reaches the heart, until every nerve, muscle, every drop of blood tingles with the idea that I am he, soham, soham. Even at the gate of death, in the greatest danger, in the thick of the battlefield, at the bottom of the ocean, on the top of the highest mountains, in the thickest of the forest, tell yourself constantly, I am he, I am he. Day and night say, I am he. These are the words that will, Swamiji continues, these are the words that will burn up the dross that is in the mind, words that will bring out the tremendous energy which is within you already, the infinite power which is sleeping in your heart. This is to be brought out by constantly hearing the truth and nothing else. Wherever there is a thought of weakness, approach not that place. Avoid all weaknesses if you want to be a Jnani. So this has Swamiji himself has summed up the method of Jnana Yoga. Because Jnana Yoga, if it has to be a transforming power in our own lives, we should have a methodology how to apply these great thoughts, these great ideas. They're not ideas, they're experiences. But to make those experiences our own, we have to have a methodology. And Swami Vivekananda, now and then in all these wonderful lectures, which we'll now analyze one after another, gives us wonderful hints. Each one of his lectures have many things in common, many repetitions are there, especially because he used to take one Upanishad after the other, the lectures on Maya and all. If you see, there are certain trends of thought, but though they are, you cannot make it systematize it into a philosophy. That is one of the complaints academicians do, but we don't need that, because every talk was a practical, it was a sadhana, and for everybody, for all the hearers, all they had to do is to just flow with the current of Swamiji's thought, the beautiful poetry. And that is why he said once that don't approach Upanishads with the intellect. You have to read them as you read poetry. Try to get some inspiration. That is exactly what he started with in the first of the 3 Sunday afternoon lectures which he delivered at the Royal Institute of Painters in watercolors. It's still there. The whole building is as it is, 191 Piccadilly, London, on 7th June 1896. It was recorded obviously by Goodwin, and the first talk of Jnana Yoga is, the topic is the necessity of religion. So if you see this talk, he traces the origin of religion to first how religion became a necessity or a need for humankind. He traces it to 2 streams of thought. One is ancestor worship, and then second is nature worship. In China and all, you will find this idea of ancestor worship deeply ingrained in the Chinese culture. Whereas some others, like the Mayan civilization, all nature was worshipped. And Swamiji makes a very important point here, that both these approaches, both these the religion, the need for religion evolved through this ancestor worship and nature worship. But one thing was common in both of them, and that is struggle to transcend the limitation of the senses. Swamiji points out, and he gives a very interesting thing, a clue from our everyday experience of dream. He says perhaps our ancestors who felt the necessity of religion realized they got the clue from our everyday experience of dream. It's rather strange that he begins his Jnana Yoga, the motivation to understand or to feel the need for religion, he says, might have come from our experience of dream, in which, if we see, the mental experience was perceived to be separate from the body. So that's the first thought which might have come to our ancestors, that in dream we don't have, where do we create this world from? What are we are apparently separate from our body. So what led to this dream? So that dream, that there is some life beyond the sense life, sensate life, the gross life as we live, the waking state. And that dream might have given a hint, and from there religion, the ideas of religion evolved. That is what Swamiji says in this. And then he says in the second, if you divide that talk into 3 or 4 parts, the second part deals with the need for inspiration or intuition, or you may say transcendental experience as the source of all religions, transcending the states of waking, dream and deep sleep, which is defined in Vedanta as the Turiya. So in very simple English language, he says this perhaps would have been the motive to somehow transcend the senses, and that without that religion, man has this deep urge in human beings, in man, made him follow different aspects of follow religion, and religion evolved, though it began with ancestor worship or nature worship, but then it went on evolving till it reached its culmination in Advaita Vedanta. Now, then in the last part of this talk, Swami Vivekananda concludes by saying, because that was the topic which was hotly discussed in London and in the Western world, which was full of utilitarian theories. So everybody, for everything, what is the utility of this philosophy, this religion? So that was the scientific approach to life, the materialistic approach of life, wanted the utility of everything. So Swamiji says, religion is not only it's for spiritual experience, but it's the basis of all our ethics also. He concludes the talk by saying this, and he points out the futility of having a utilitarian basis for religion. You can't judge a religion by its utility. He says man tries to realize the infinite in physical terms, the gross terms, but is unable to do it. And that is where renunciation comes. He renounces this method of trying to get religion, reach the truths of religion through the true matter, and he renounces this approach in favor of a supersensuous approach. So there's a wonderful quote, this renunciation, Nivritti Marga, is the basis of all ethics. He says, without that, there is no basis for any ethics. Why should I be ethical? So Swamiji says in his oft quoted utterance, he says, what is the utility, the effect of this spiritual knowledge? In these days, because he was speaking in London, he says, in these days, we have to measure everything by utility. How many pounds, shillings, and pence it represents. What right has a person to ask that truth should be judged by the standard of utility or money? Suppose there is no utility. Will it be less true? So he says utility is not the test of truth. Nevertheless, there is highest utility in this. He says, what is the utility of practicing a spiritual life? Happiness, that which we see, is what everyone is seeking for. but the majority seek it in things which are evanescent and not real. No happiness, Swamiji concludes this beautiful lecture by saying, no happiness was ever found in the senses. There never was a person who found happiness in the senses or sense enjoyment. Happiness is found only in the spirit. Therefore, the highest utility for mankind is to find this happiness in the spirit. So then finally he concludes this talk, the first talk, the necessity of religion, by saying there is a need for universal outlook. There were so many other religious clashes going on, Protestant religion and then Roman Catholics and then Islam, many things where there was a lot of confusion, and society felt that religion is the reason why there are so many clashes and conflicts. So Swamiji concludes this talk by saying the need for an universal outlook, a scientific outlook, which is necessary, and religion should be studied from a higher standpoint. And he says the tribal conceptions of God, and then the worst thing of mixing religion and social pursuits, including politics, have to be given up. And a real scientific spirituality, which alone can be universal, has to be lived every moment for the good of the world. So that we come to the conclusion of the first important talk he gave in London. Then in Piccadilly, the second talk which appears in Jnana Yoga is the real nature of man, which is the second talk published in Jnana Yoga, the book Jnana Yoga. But this lecture was the third of his lectures which he delivered in Piccadilly in London. So they have not given the second talk which he delivered in this Royal Institute. So Swamiji in this talk, the real nature of man, he discusses the precedence of spirit over matter, continuing from where he left. He says, spirit first having established that matter, only supersensuous truths can satisfy mankind, give him real peace and bliss, and also which is the basis of ethics. He says, the precedence of spirit over matter, very graphically he says, death snatches everything. And he discusses the changing nature of the gross and subtle Prakriti. That is the new idea of Prakriti introduces in the real nature of man. And then he says, an inquiry of life beyond death was responsible, and this search for an intelligent conscious principle beyond body and mind, the spiritual nature of man, was the pursuit that gave rise to the different religious ideas. And then he points out that the pure spirit, which is pure consciousness, which is universal and all pervading, is the real man. So here, the real nature of man, he establishes that this pure spirit alone can be the real man, and concludes by saying that the true welfare of the world lies in the realization of this universal spirit. And it is this potential divinity which is within the real man is to be manifest through spiritual realization. And he concludes by some of the greatest utterances he has made. It is in this lecture he says, truth does not pay homage to any society, ancient or modern. Society has to pay homage to truth or die. Is nothing practical but pounds, shillings, and pence? Imagine speaking in front of the scientific community. He says, is nothing practical but pounds, shillings, and pence? Where the whole world was running after these things. That society is the greatest, Swamiji continues, where that's the last part of this talk, where the highest truths become practical. If society is not fit for the highest truths, make it so. The sooner the better. Stand up, men and women, in this spirit. Dare to believe in the truth, dare to practice the truth. And then he says, the world requires a few hundred bold men and women. Practice this boldness which dares know the truth, which dares show the truth in life, which does not quake before death, nay, welcomes death, makes a man know that he is the spirit, that in the whole universe nothing can kill me. Then alone you will be free. Then you will know your real soul, the real man. This Atman is first to be heard, then thought about, and then meditated upon. So this is the second lecture, the real nature of man, which he delivered in London. After these two talks, which are published in Jnana Yoga, he gave a series of talks at 39 Victoria Street classroom. It was a classroom talk. It was not a public lecture. And it is in London, this Victoria Street, but the building unfortunately is not there. This was in October 1896. And the topic of the first talk was a series of talks on a new concept which he was going to discuss in his own original way. The topic was Maya and illusion. Now, this is the most misunderstood concept in Advaita Vedanta, this idea of Maya. And imagine Swami Vivekananda speaking to people who do not have any background of Vedanta and trying to explain this difficult concept of Maya. So he begins with the history of the concept of Maya in Vedanta and its Vedantic meaning. And what he says is something very significant. He just says Maya is nothing, neither it is a theory, but it is just a statement of fact. He is making it so pragmatic, so obvious. He says Maya is nothing but what we are and what we see around us. Nothing can be as simple as that. But you see how he explains. Then he says, we see this world through our senses and mind, which is always limited by time, space, and causation. Each one of us will see the world in a different manner because everyone has a different capacity of the senses to interact with the world. And the minds are also changing and of different capacities. So, therefore, the world experienced externally comes to the conclusion that in such a case, how can you say that this ever-changing world, external world, it can be ultimate? It can never be ultimate. It is always subjective and it keeps on changing. But it cannot be at the same time, to explain the concept of Maya, he says it cannot be called non-existent as it is experienced by all of us. We can't say it is just Maya or Maya in the common sense. People think it is just an illusion. No, it is experienced, but it is not what we exactly what we see it as. He explains the world, which in the next part of his lecture he says it is nothing but a meeting or a mixture of contradictions. That is how he defines Maya. We are born in Maya, we live and die in it. Everything is Nama Rupa. Everything that has a form, everything that calls upon an idea in your mind is within Maya, for everything that is bound by the laws of space, time, and causation is within Maya. So this is how in this talk on Maya and illusion, he describes the concept of Maya. Now, he further discusses, he says, analysis of the conditions of life to show the contradictions. What are the contradictions? That life follows death, death follows life. Everyone clings to life as though he knows he is not going to die. That is what Yudhishthira also mentioned in the Mahabharata. What is the most surprising thing in this universe? What is the most surprising thing? He said one of the most surprising truths is that every day people see people dying and still everyone clings to life. So raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha, this clinging to life, abhinivesha. So, and then he gives another drastic example, a very, very drastic case of a mother who discovers that her child is evil and is causing a lot of trouble for her, and yet she is attached. She doesn't want to give up that attachment. So these are the different conditions of life which we observe in our day-to-day life, which show that this life is full of contradictions. This external life is full of contradictions. So Swamiji concludes by saying, however grand it may seem, so as some of the German philosophers said, that perfectionism, that one day this imperfect world, if we follow certain philosophies or certain way of life, we will reach a state where everything in the world will be a utopia, a perfect world to live in. But Swamiji says it can never be. Everything is evolving, and one day everything will be perfect is an idea which is good for coffee table philosophers, as the German philosophers try to explain. But he says perfection, a perfect world can never be. That is how he defines Maya. So, but at the same time, he knows that agnostics may take this in a different way. He says if nothing is going to change, if this contradiction will always remain, then make the best of life, enjoy life. And Vedanta does not make any compromise with these agnostics. The agnostic says, like the materialists, like the Charvakas, they say just enjoy life, don't bother about its consequences. But Swamiji says, whatever you may do, you may think that is an ideal way to live the life. But he says this aspiration, deep aspiration for freedom, freedom from the senses, never dies in man. The idea of a personal God who controls this Maya is a good beginning. We begin with a personal God who helps us to get rid of this bondage of Maya, this prison house of Maya. And then slowly this idea evolves to reach Advait Vedanta, that is Jnana. So it evolves, and then man finds that he was standing out, what the God that he was worshipping outside is really within, and it is himself. So he comes to the conclusion when he gets the ultimate knowledge. Now, the second talk at the same venue, this Victoria Street, was on 20th October, and that was on the Maya, the concept of Maya and the evolution of the concept of God. That was the second talk. So here also we'll find Swamiji begins with the idea that the idea of God also evolved when human society evolved. Men evolved. We began with the tribal approach to religion, a primitive approach to religion which was based on ancestor worship, nature worship. But all the great powers of nature, they fascinated us, and we wanted to be as powerful as that. But then he found that this explanation, this nature worship, this ancestor worship was not enough. So the idea of God also evolved. And that is how in Jnana we'll see the highest concept of the ultimate reality, the pure consciousness evolved. So he discusses the ethical problems which are faced by monotheism. When we believe in a personal God, according to Swamiji, because he had among his audience a lot of people who wanted a scientific approach to religion. They were not happy with this idea of personal God or monotheism. So he tries to show in this lecture that as one progresses from Pravrutti Marga towards Nivrutti Marga, towards living a sensate life, but the question which normally people ask when they are on the Pravrutti Marga, they want God to help them, they want a personal God to solve all their problems. But ultimately, a question is asked, especially during these COVID times. People ask, why is God? Many people ask this question who believe in a personal God. If personal God is so merciful, why is there so much suffering? Why does he allow evil to come to us? So this question was uppermost in many people's minds. So Swamiji discusses that. So Swamiji says in India, Swamiji says we did not stop with this monotheism, that all the primitive gods and polytheism and even monotheism and all the theisms were evolved further into an idea of impersonal absolute, the impersonal God of Advait Vedanta, of Jnana. Then we come to the third talk at the same venue on 22nd October, which was on a third lecture on Maya. That was Maya and freedom. So here also Swamiji practically repeats what he had said earlier. And he says this life is full of contradictions. Otherwise, why should people come to religion? If he's happy with the present state of mind, he'll never come to religion. Man tries to conquer external nature materially, the gross world. He wants everything. He wants to heap everything around himself. But nature ultimately, as to use Swamiji's words, catches hold of his throat and makes him release and give up everything. So that is how nature acts. Nature acts. There are contradictions which we see in life, and Swamiji says man tries to conquer external nature, but ultimately external nature crushes him. That's what we find during these COVID days. We can't explain how nature can be so evil, or nature can be so evil towards the people. So then he discusses the concept of pravrutti and nivritti. He says there are two ways open to man. We may be born in Maya, we may be slaves of Maya, and we may be following the pravrutti marga, and we may die in Maya. The world may appear like a prison, but that doesn't mean there is no way out. And then he quotes the famous verse, Tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagarat. So Krishna says, this Maya, this Maya which is under my control, you please don't worry. Tesham, to those people, aham samuddharta, I'll lift them from the ocean of Maya, mrityu samsara, the cycle of life and death, I lift them. Mrityu samsara sagarat. That is what Sri Krishna says in the Gita. And Swamiji also quotes from the Bible. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavily laden. So Jesus Christ, also a personal God or a personal idea, a prophet who claims that there is a way out of Maya. If we listen to them, we can transcend this Maya. And at the end of this lecture, he says, religion thus is the voice of freedom, freedom from the bondage of Maya, moving towards the spirit. So Swamiji says, what is civilization? And Swamiji answers that by saying it is the progressive reading of spirit over matter. Whenever spirit succeeds, whenever spirit establishes its supremacy over matter, material things, whenever the spiritual side wins, the progressive reading of spirit over matter into matter, whatever is material, when we give up this, the Nivrutti Marga, when we follow the Nivrutti Marga, Swamiji says the spirit triumphs at the end. And that is what religion does and should do. After these three talks on Maya in Jnana Yoga, sometime in November or December, Swamiji gave a beautiful talk on the absolute and its manifestation. So there is a very difficult question which is asked when people try to expound this Advaita philosophy. Advaita, it becomes very difficult when they ask this question. We accept that there is an ultimate truth. It is infinite. But how come you see this infinite as finite? How does it become finite? How does the absolute become finite? The absolute remains unknown and unknowable to the mind. So Swamiji answers that. He tries to say that the absolute always remains unknown or unknowable. So yato vacho nivartante means where the mind does not reach, where the mind stops and turns back. So the absolute, he says, cannot be reached by our intellect, our mind, because it cannot be subject to time, space, and causation. He has drawn a beautiful chart in that talk in Jnana Yoga. It has been published, where he says when the absolute seen through the prism of time, space, and causation, it becomes the finite world, the finite jivas, and everybody's manifest. So, but he says in the midst of this finite, this absolute can be known, it can be experienced. How? He says it can be known more intensely than even objects. As he says, all objects are known in and through the eternal witness of all knowledge, the pure singular consciousness, the substratum of everything. Here we can recollect what Swami Vivekananda was told by his Guru Sri Ramakrishna. When he was asked, do you see God? He said, I see him. Not only do I see him, but I can show him to you, and I see him more intensely than I see you. So Swamiji repeats that. He says absolute or God is known much more intensely than we know the objects. Knowing the objects, it's very easy. I mean, it is not real knowing. But all the objects are known in and through this eternal witness. So Swamiji's wonderful quote is there. Here he says in this particular talk, he says, here is one of the profoundest passages of Vedanta. He's quoting Shvetaketu. He's quoting the Upanishad. He that is the essence of your soul, he is the truth, he is the self, and thou art that. Tattvamasi Shvetaketu, O Shvetaketu. This is what is meant by thou art that or God. You can't describe him by any other language. Swamiji says all attempts of language, calling him father, brother, our dearest friend, are attempts to objectify that God. All the ideas of personal God. This is the theme on which Swamiji is dealing, which cannot, and these things cannot be done. He says all attempts at language by calling him father or brother or our dearest friend are attempts to objectify God, which cannot be done. He is the eternal subject of everything. Then Swamiji says, I am the subject of this chair. I see the chair. So God is the eternal subject of my soul. How can you objectify him? The essence of your souls, the reality of everything, cannot be objectified. Thus, I would repeat to you once more, God is neither knowable or unknowable, but something infinitely higher than that. He is one with us, something which we cannot deny. And that which is one with us is neither knowable or unknowable as our own self. You cannot know your own self. You cannot move it out and make it an object to look at it, because you are that and you cannot separate yourself from it. Neither is it unknowable. It's not unknowable, it's a matter of experience. For what is better known than yourself? The self cannot be denied. It is really the center of all our knowledge. In exactly the same sense, Swamiji says, God is neither unknowable nor known, but infinitely higher than both, for he is our real self. Then Swamiji explains through that chart how the absolute in becomes or appears to be in relation to time, space, and causation. It appears as the universe. He gives the example, the ocean and the waves. And then the waves are part of the ocean, and they are when the waves do not exist, they merge, they become the absolute. Then Swamiji proceeds to discuss the meaning of evolution. Every human being, every individual is trying to discover his absolute nature. When he named this topic of this Jnana Yoga lecture as absolute and its manifestation, he explains his utility, saying that everybody, without exception, someday or the other, will try to discover this absolute nature. And that alone, he says, can explain ethics and morality. Swamiji says, change is always subjective. He says, when you want to change, you can't change the world, you can't change the moral codes and the ethics and say that the world should be like this. We can't have do's and don'ts, either for us, for others. It doesn't work that way. So Swamiji says the most, I just have a nice quote here. Swamiji says, change is always subjective. All through evolution, you find that the conquest of external nature comes by the change in the subject. This is very difficult to understand, but this is the fundamental of all ethics. Then Swamiji says, apply this to religion and morality, and then you will find that the conquest of evil comes by the change in the subjective alone. This is how the Advaita system gets its whole force on the subjective side of man. To talk of evil and misery outside is nonsense, because they do not exist outside. That's why he says this Advaita alone can form the basis of a scientific religion. So next we come quickly, we will try to sum up. Another, I think 15 minutes are available. So I'll just try to sum up the other important lectures he gave in London, which form part of his Jnana Yoga lecture. In the same venue, perhaps before he gave this absolute and manifestation, on 27th October 1896, Swamiji spoke on a very important theme. The important topic was God in everything. I think this was the precursor to the 4 important talks that he delivered later on the theme Practical Vedanta. On 10th, 12th, 17th, and 18th November 1896, at the same place, respectively, Practical Vedanta was delivered in the same place, at the Victoria Street. But before that, he spoke on God in everything. So this talk can be divided into 2 parts. It's based on the Ishopanishad, this God in everything. is nothing but a wonderful exposition of Ishopanishad by Swami Vivekananda. And then he explains the talk can be divided into small three parts. This big talk can be divided into three parts. The first part, you see, Swamiji tries to explain the meaning of renunciation, a term which was making many people nervous. In fact, even today, when you talk of renunciation, people are people think, why is renunciation necessary for practicing religion? So Ishopanishad gives a beautiful in this God in everything, which is based on his exposition of the wonderful Upanishad, Ishopanishad, the small Upanishad. He explains the true meaning of renunciation by saying, Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Cover everything with the Lord. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kimcha jagatyam jagatha. So this whole Ishopanishad is trying to explain through this beautiful discourse on God in everything. And then he concludes, and then at the end he says, if you put God in your every moment, every conversation, in your form, in everything, the whole scene changes. And the world, instead of appearing as one of war and misery, will become a heaven here itself. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagatha tena tyaktena bhut. So he explains this God in everything by expounding the Ishopanishad. Then the second thing he says, one has to develop a witness attitude to life. How do we practice? How can you enjoy? Tena tyaktena bhunjita. How can you enjoy by renouncing? This is a concept which appears to be very difficult. On one side, you say you renounce, and then you say you enjoy. So he gives a beautiful explanation saying, if you develop a witness attitude in life, then you can practice true detachment. That is the theme of the second part of the lecture. He says, just be an onlooker and don't be a prey to your reactive mind. We have several parts of the mind. One part of the mind is always reactive. The other buddhi is non-reactive. It can play the part of a sakshi, the onlooker. And then he explains the practical benefits of trying to see God in everything. He says, his own words, let us see. He says, how to do your work. God in everything means it's meant for how to conduct ourselves with this idea based on the Ishopanishad, how to do our work and live a life of fulfillment. He says, do your work, Vedanta says. So I'm quoting Swamiji now. Do your work. It first advises how to work by giving up the apparent elusive world. Understanding fully well that this world is elusive, then only then you can do your work. What is meant by that? Now Swamiji explains. Seeing God everywhere. That is how he develops and explains this idea. Thus do you work. So work, says the Vedanta, putting God in everything and knowing him to be in everything. Work incessantly, holding life as something deified, as God himself, and knowing that this is all what we have to do. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. This is all we should ask for. God is in everything. Where else shall I find him? Shall we go to find him? He is already there in every work, in every thought, in every feeling. Thus knowing we must work. This is the only way. There is no other way. Thus, the effects of work will not bind us. This is practically a free translation of the Ishopanishad. We have seen how false desires are the cause of misery. Swamiji continues. And evil that we suffer. But when they are thus deified, when we, that is, Swamiji says that when we look upon this whole drama of life, every moment of life as a witness, then they are purified through God and they bring no evil, they bring no misery. Those who have not learned this secret will have to live in a demonical world until they discover it. Asurya namate lok, andena tamasa, all those things are there. So he says people will have to live. It's not that they have to go to hell or somewhere. The world itself becomes hell and they will have to live in a demonical world, a world full of trials and tribulations because they are attached. And many do not know what an infinite mine of bliss is in them, around them and everywhere. This is the theme of God in everything. They have not yet discovered what is this demonical world. It is nothing but ignorance. So he concludes this talk, this wonderful talk which he gave, God in everything, which he further elaborated in the same venue through his 4 lectures on practical Vedanta. But he gave the essence in this God in everything. Then we come the first of the next 3 talks delivered by Swamiji in London. I'll quickly go through it. It was delivered on 27th October 1896, and the venue is same, and the talk is realization. Now this wonderful talk that he gave is based on the Kathopanishad. So now he has perhaps taken this Kathopanishad for discussion in this lecture of Jnana Yoga, which has been published as the 8th talk in Jnana Yoga. Swamiji starts his lecture according to how the Kathopanishad proceeds with this theme of realization. What is realization? Swamiji says, what constitutes realization? What is the meaning of realization? So, the discovering of the true self. This is followed by a wonderful discussion on Shraddha. That is one thing which Swamiji says in the Kathopanishad. It is the idea of Shraddha, which has been very loosely translated as faith. Faith is not the exact translation. Shraddha is faith, or faith with conviction, something that comes. The Shraddha which Nachiketa had when he approached Yama to know the secret of death, or maybe to know the true meaning of realization. So this discussion on Kathopanishad, which forms part of the lecture known as Realization, which Swamiji delivered in London, he first discusses the idea of heavens, its significance and its relative importance. And the true spiritual pursuit is something different than just going to heavens. Then he tries to discuss what happens after death, based on the Kathopanishad, of course, and then the utility for such a realization. So that is the first part of his series of lectures on Kathopanishad. The second lecture, which he developed on the 3rd November 1896, the same venue, he continues the discussion on the wonderful Upanishad, Kathopanishad, of which he was very fond. He discussed Shraddha in the first talk, but he explained, to be brief, I'll just sum up what he discussed in this. I'll not give the exact quote. 4 or 5 points he elaborated upon. The first thing he elaborated in the second talk on Kathopanishad was the finite cannot express the infinite. The second thing is, world is always a mixture of good and evil, and the real destination of humankind is to go beyond both good, evil, and also good. And the third point he covered was that the universal spirit, the realization of which will not affect, the evil will not affect that universal spirit which is within us. And the discovery of the self, the next point is the only way to attain peace in this life. So, and as usual, he always concludes most of his talks on Jnana Yoga, if you see, he concludes by saying that it is practical, lest people think that it is a philosophy for intellectuals. He says no, he describes the practicality of Vedanta, how this Kathopanishad helps you transcend the idea, the fear of death, and gives you eternal life. And then the third talk, which is the 10th talk, the last talk he delivered in London, is the famous talk, The Freedom of the Soul. It is also based on the Kathopanishad, and the venue is same, but it was on 5th November. So Swamiji begins this talk. He gives a historical background and the evolution of Vedantic literature, culminating in later Upanishads like Kathopanishad and also Bhagavad Gita. He says practically they are discussing the same thing. The Kathopanishad is a later Upanishad, of course. The earlier Vedantic literature, which began with different forms of worship, nature worship, and all those things, they culminate, they evolve into the later Upanishads, and that is found in the Kathopanishad. And then he gives a wonderful exposition on the idea of the divinity of man, which was his central theme. Each soul is potentially divine, but that is in Raj Yoga. But here he gives the idea of the central theme of all religions, that is the divinity of man. And then he goes on to explain that spirituality and materialism can never go together. One can't have God and mammon at the same time, as Jesus famously said. You cannot have God and mammon at the same time. So he makes it very clear that spirituality and materialism are diametrically opposite, and it is discussed. And then he says the famous theme which he discusses towards the end is that Advaita alone. He's so emphatic that whenever Swamiji speaks on a particular, when he speaks of Jnana Yoga, you will feel that Jnana Yoga alone is true. Bhakti, Karma Yoga and all those things. Though he tries to bring in elements of all the different yogas, but here he declares that Advaita alone and alone can be a saving gospel for man. And then he says, the famous quote, I'll just quote, it's a very famous quote, very often it is quoted by Advaitins. So he says, dualistic ideas have ruled the world long enough. See, he was bold to say this in London, where theistic approach to religion and of course science was there, but people believed in a God. So he says, dualistic ideas have ruled the world long enough, and this is the result. Why not make a new experiment? That is what he meant when he said in Pinckney's Green that I want to turn the world upside down. He came to change the basic thinking of humanity. For ages we have been thinking, and this was so boldly. Of course, Swami Ashokanandaji also takes up this theme and elaborates in a very, very powerful way. And then he says, why not make a new experiment? He doesn't say this is the only way, but he says, why not? We have had dualistic theories and they have ruled the world long enough. Why not make a new experiment? Why not, if it may take ages for all minds, this is what Swamiji said, to receive monism, but why not begin now? If we have told it to 20 persons in our lives, we have done a great work. And that is exactly what he aimed to do. He was tired of all these lectures. He said, I just want 20 men who can stand on the yonder street and say that I want this God, I'm God and God alone. That is why I'll conclude with this. We have just 3 minutes now. This is the only way to reach the goal, Swamiji says. You see how powerful his utterance was in this last lecture which he delivered in London. This is the only way to reach the goal, to tell ourselves, to tell everybody else that we are divine. And as we go on repeating this, strength comes. He who falters at first will get stronger and stronger, and the voice will increase in volume until the truth takes possession of our hearts, courses through our veins, permeates our bodies. Delusion will vanish as the light becomes more and more effulgent. Load after load of ignorance will vanish, and then will come a time when all else has disappeared and the sun alone shines. So after this, these 10 lectures which form the first part of Jnana Yoga, there are many more lectures, 5 more lectures which Swamiji delivered in America. The 4 talks, Cosmos, Macrocosm, the Microcosm, which were delivered at the Hardman Hall, New York on 19th and 26th. In Macrocosm, Swamiji comes with a new idea, which is not new idea, the cyclical process of nature. Everything goes, and then the implications of the cyclical process and what evolution means. The Darwin's evolution theory was so popular. So he showed that a spiritual theory of evolution is the consequence of this cyclic process. And in the next lecture, the Microcosm, which he delivered in New York, he explains how perceptions take place. And then he talks about the self-conscious principle in man which does not change. He also discusses in great detail. In Microcosm, it's the Jiva, the doctrine of rebirth, proofs of past birth, hereditary as an inadequate explanation for the characteristics which a human being exhibits, and then reincarnation, which ultimately leads to human freedom. So that is, and that culminates in a beautiful lecture on immortality, which he delivered in Brooklyn on 17 January. The themes he discussed here: individual soul's immortality as the part of that cosmic mind, why man as Atman is immortal, and the true meaning of immortality. So these are the wonderful lectures he discussed, which form the part of Jnana Yoga. So then finally, I'll just end with a beautiful quote which sums up all the different approaches to religion. So this was delivered. I mean, this idea was given in the New York lecture. He says these are the salient points of all the three steps, the step theory: Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. It culminates in Advaita. These are the salient points or of the three steps which Indian religious thought has taken in regard to God. We have seen that it began with the personal, the extra cosmic God. It went from external to the internal cosmic body, God who is immanent in the universe, and finally ended in identifying the soul itself with that God and making one soul a unit of all these various manifestations in the universe. This is the last word of the Vedas. It begins with dualism, goes through a qualified monism, and ends in perfect monism. So this is the theme of Jnana Yoga, beginning from his first lecture in London to all the American lectures. And I think I have run short of time, and just 1 minute I've taken more. So I think I should conclude now. Thank you, Maharaj.
Pranam Maharaj, thank you for your nice talk. Maharaj, we will now have some questions. We
Yes.
will read the questions for you and we request you to kindly answer.
Okay.
So the first question is, Maharaj, from Sriraj Roy.
Yes.
He is asking, in order to progress in Jnana Yoga on a daily basis, what is required? Is it reading, contemplation, and discrimination, or what? And how to progress in Jnana Yoga path on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So first, if you remember in the beginning, I said Swamiji begins in his first talk with Shravana, Manana, and Nidhi Dhyasana. That is the traditional way. But for most of us, the wonderful talks on God in everything, the Ishopanishad can be a wonderful beginning. That's why they perhaps teach Ishopanishad in the beginning. So God in everything, trying to deify everything, as Swamiji said. And while discussing that God in everything, while commenting upon expounding this Ishopanishad, he speaks of a witness-like attitude. So in our day-to-day life, if that attitude can be somehow incorporated in our own life, trying to be detached. You see, in Raj Yoga, we say that there are two types of, basically there are four types of, four parts of the mind. One is the reactive mind or manas, and the other is buddhi. So aligning with the buddhi and not with the reactive mind, and just watching the whole thing as if it's a painting on a, it's difficult to do, painting on a canvas. Swamiji says this idea, Jnana Yoga, can be practiced. So the practical part of it has been described in this God in everything. I think to practice Jnana Yoga, it's good to read and reread, and then try to imbibe the ideas and try to practice it, because that is more important, because that is how the transformation starts. When we begin with small things, our daily actions can be done in and through God. If we have a personal God, it's fine, even if we believe in the impersonal, because Swamiji is not against. In fact, in his last talk, he says these are all different steps which one undertakes. There's evolution in this. So there is, the Advaitin has no problem with the dualistic ideas. We are dualistic when we are considering ourselves as the body and the mind. So we begin with dualism and try to deify everything like the Ishopanishad does. I think that is a very practical way of practicing Jnana Yoga in our life.
Thank you, Maharaj. The next question is from Dikshant Roy Chaudhary. What should be our mentality and actions to look life as witness and thus live life but not cling to it?
what should be our action and mentality.
Yes, Maharaj. What should be
Yeah.
our mentality towards our
And
actions so that
okay,
we can look life, we can see life as a witness and
yes.
live our life, but not get clinged to it.
What he's asking, in fact, is what should be our attitude. Mentality means attitude. Okay. So as I said, I'm just repeating what I said just now, but the witness-like attitude, the Sakshi Bhava, which Swamiji speaks of in this God in everything, can be practiced if with a little bit of help from our Raj Yoga. Many times we know what is to be done. Swamiji says, we tell a child, do this, don't do this, but we don't teach him how to do that and how not to do it. That is the problem. So we have three aspects of our mind, which the Western psychology discusses: the thinking faculty, the feeling or the emotional faculty, and then we have the willing faculty, uh, which we use in three different yogas: Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. We take care of our emotions, purify it, and then we have the willpower, which develops as a result of action. So our attitude. Now the fourth faculty which human beings have is the power to restrain. So the power to restrain is the unique technique of Raj Yoga. Raj Yoga Patanjali found, and Swamiji also says that restraining the vrittis, or trying to reduce the number of thoughts, that will help us in maintaining a witness-like attitude. So when you practice Raj Yoga, you find you get more and more control over your mind, and the part of that of our mind which is known as manas, which is highly reactive. It is because it is very close to the prana. See, we have this five-layered personality. It begins with Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Koshas. So these different personalities, they are not separate things. They are not like sheets, they are just interact with each other. So the Annamaya Kosha is affected by the Pranamaya Kosha. The pranas, the life force, impacts the body, and the body impacts the prana. So also the prana impacts the mind, and the mind impacts the prana. So when we do our day-to-day activities, when we try to have that attitude of being a witness to everything, our reactive mind is agitated by this prana, the reactive mind or manas. So that manas has to be transformed. That is the practical way. Attitudes don't change so easily. So character is built through repeated habits. So we have to make a habit of meditation. And when that habit forms, what we actually do is restrain this manas from taking reacting. The problem is that our mind is not under our control. Our thoughts are not under our control, because we are living more in the state of manas than in the state of buddhi. So as we progress in Raj Yoga, as we make the mind calmer and calmer, I mean, vrittis become less and less. The intuitive faculty, or the faculty of intuition, which is buddhi, it begins to manifest, and with that it is possible to force the personality, or force ourselves to be witness to everything that we see. We just don't react immediately. So to stop this reaction, we have to take the help of Raj Yoga. Is it okay?
Yes, Maharaj, thank you. Maharaj, there are two more questions I will read out.
Okay. Okay.
How can we transcend the limits of our mind and
Mm.
experience consciousness, or allow consciousness this to surface? The
Okay.
Shakshi witness consciousness, Atma Brahman, etc.
No, the question of consciousness surfacing is not there. It's not something which is hidden. Consciousness is always there. But the problem is our ignorance is covering that consciousness. All we can do is remove the covering, and that we have to do. It is of course very difficult, because we cannot have this Sakshi Bhav all of a sudden. We have to first control our thoughts, the volatile mind, the manas, which is always bubbling with thoughts, thoughts which come from the depth of the causal sharira, the karana sharira, where the samskaras are there. The samskaras in our mind, they are a result of habits, wrong habits over a period of time. So even though we do not want these thoughts, they simply bubble up. So for the consciousness to manifest, we have to first restrain this. That is what Raj Yoga does. And even with the other yogas, the technique followed is the same. Somehow try to control the vrittis, which color or which make that consciousness rather opaque. So we don't see that the consciousness is always there, ever shining Atman, or the pure consciousness, the Purusha is always there. Brahman is always there. We don't have to uncover it, or maybe we don't have to bring it to the surface or something like that. We just have to remove the darkness of ignorance, the vrittis, especially the samskaras which cover that consciousness. And slowly, as we progress, as our buddhi is awakened, as we go up the ladder of spiritual life and live more, awaken the intuitive power, as I said, through meditation, we can surely enable that. And the consciousness will not surface, actually. The consciousness will be all around us. That consciousness will motivate every action of ours, whether it is a gross action or a subtle action. It is all suffused with this consciousness. The more we manifest that consciousness, that divinity, Swamiji uses the word divinity, it is the same as the pure consciousness. Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj. The last question from Dr.
Yes.
Biplab Burman. How do we understand that jnana is improving in us?
Jnana is improving in us. I mean, we are progressing in the path of Jnana Yoga, you mean to say. Yes. So one of the signs, as Swami Vivekananda said, unselfishness is common to all the four yogas, whether it is jnana, self-abnegation. That's what he uses. In Karma Yoga, he describes that. And this idea is very important. This is one thing which happens in all the four yogas. And so even in jnana, the idea, if a person is becoming very selfish and very possessive, and if those qualities are manifest, then you can know that you are going down the ladder. So first humility comes, because jnana, humility comes in the sense true humility, not some acting or something like that. True humility or true self-abnegation is a sign of progress. Unselfishness is God. Swami Vivekananda defines unselfishness as God. So the more you become, the more you progress in the field of jnana. If your jnana sadhana for jnana yoga is progressing properly, then you become more and more unselfish, because you see the same divinity in and around everything that surrounds in yourself, in all others. So you try to see God in everything. That makes you more unselfish. So that is the test. The test of religion, according to Swamiji, is this unselfishness. Whichever yoga you follow, especially Jnana Yoga. Otherwise, one can be very vain, and the self which, because that's why they say sometimes that bhakti is a much more natural path. But that doesn't mean that jnanis become vain or lose their humility. In fact, if one is practicing jnana yoga properly and asserting the spirit and not the ego, the puny ego, then definitely his ego, which was manifesting earlier, that becomes reduced. There is an attenuation of that, that ego becomes less and less, and then you can safely say that one is making progress, depending on how unselfish you are. That is, I think, the best way to judge. Okay. So I think we have finished 15 minutes.
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. We have finished all questions. So we are really grateful to hear from you and your nice deliberation of the questions.
Oh, it was
We
nice.
hope that you also enlightened us last year in the consciousness webinar, and
Yes.
this year also you kindly agreed. So we are really hopeful in the future also we will get you, Maharaj. So
Oh,
please
thank
accept
you.
our
Thank you
pranams.
for giving me this, especially revered Swami Atma Priyananji. We are missing him. He came here last time, and hope after COVID we will host him here.
Wherever we are in the infinite, we are all one.
Yes, that is true. And
Thank you so much.
this Maharaj. Pranam Maharaj.
Om
Shanti Shanti
Shanti Hari
Hari Om Tat
Sat Shri Rama Krishna
Pranamastu.
So thank you all participants. Tomorrow's talk is at 6 p.m. same time. Tomorrow's talk is by Swami Vireshananda, editor of Prabuddha Bharata, and the title of his talk is Why Each Chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is Called a Yoga. We welcome all of you to attend.